No one needs reminding of the awful things that he has said, but words matter. So The Guardian have changed their editorial guidelines because the words we use matter. But I think images matter more. And I'm sorry to show you this heartbreaking slide, but when we're grappling with the unimaginable, images really help. And this leads me to sort of my next lesson, really, about thinking visually. Images rule the world. Show, don't tell. And you saw a previous slide as part of the briefing to us that we had to show it, not just tell it. There is, of course, a rich vein of visually striking, non-violent direct action, particularly in the arts and culture sector. This is Liberate Tate doing a striking piece of work with their members. We decided we wanted to do something that was less intense and more playful. So we threw some ideas around in this brainstorming session. Katie Rosethorn from the VFX company Frame Store recalled a PR stunt. So in 2018, Amsterdam's famous giant lettering was removed, causing public outrage. There goes my selfie moment. People were genuinely distraught at those letters being removed. So Greenpeace saw an opportunity and replaced them in 2019 with I Amazonia. Their message was, of course, about losing what you take for granted and raising awareness of the disasters occurring in the Amazon. And that leads me to the next lesson. Beg, borrow, and steal. Don't reinvent the wheel, there's no need. All the best ideas are adaptations. Indeed, unbeknownst to us at the time, Bristol Museum had already trialled a similar idea. They shrouded some endangered animals from their collection and received some great coverage for that. As you can see from the images, they tell a really nice story. So Art Strike wasn't original, but we did need to find a new angle, which takes me to lesson number 3, find your hook. This is all about capturing the imagination as quickly as possible, as vividly as possible. An idea, a concept, needs that hook to spread quickly. And we kept coming back to this idea that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And so that was the crystallizing statement for us, and so crucial in the early phases. And we evolved that crystallizing statement to try and bring it to life. We asked ourselves, what if the Mona Lisa went on strike? This suddenly made the whole concept more real, more exciting. What if Hope the whale went on strike? What if the Eiffel Tower went on strike? And in those early days, as we were developing the idea, it was these crystallizing statements, these hooks, that really helped it sing and helped us spread the word. So lesson number 5 is around following the energy. So essentially it's about building on what's gone before. There was a huge groundswell of movement, a movement around the climate crisis already, and we needed to tap into that energy, follow the momentum, build on what's gone before. Going on strike isn't original, but Greta injected new energy, new blood. Who could have known that her small and humble action could grow into such an incredible global movement? She started very small, she brought new energy to it, and then it spiraled. And Art Strike is just really a drop in the ocean riding on her tails. We borrowed the idea, we created a new hook, and then we built on the energy that was already existing. We couldn't have gone anywhere, of course, without the momentum that Greta and her peers had already created. So Art Strike was one of many ideas that we developed in that hot room on a summer afternoon on London's Silicon Roundabout. And this is just to show really that it was part of a wider noise, and the value of tapping into that sort of wider movement. We created shareable memes, viral videos, posters, printable placards. And you can see on the right, we even coordinated a national fire drill to raise the alarm on the crisis, which I thought was a lovely idea. I wish I had had that idea. So our tiny contribution started with a small group of people pulling in the same direction, the 40 of us in that room. And we were supporting a slightly bigger community of young people who were taking to the streets. And that community of young people wanted to mobilize an even bigger community to join them. They wanted 1 million people on the streets of the UK. And that action was about telling a global community that shit is getting real. And so it's all these steps from smaller up to bigger and tapping into that energy. So 8 weeks after we conceived Art Strike, just one day before the official strike, we had our first bite. It was an elk in Crystal Palace. And as you can see, it borrows from the great work by Bristol Museum with the shrouding, but they were happy enough to brand it under the Art Strike movement. Then, slightly strangely, a bridge in North Wales, and a famous industrial pioneer in Derby went on strike, all at the 11th hour. You might think from the outside that it was all rather straightforward and going rather well. But lesson number 6, do the legwork. Nothing happens without the legwork. Ideas are cheap, and it's people and perspiration that make things happen. The rather unglamorous side to the story is one of spreadsheets. And I think almost every presentation I've ever made has had a screen grab of a spreadsheet. Getting this project off the ground took a huge amount of cajoling, pestering, nudging, nagging. And this was the master sheet for those discussions. We flirted with Derby museums for an age. They were in, then they were out, then they were back in, but they had to check it with the director, then they were out. But the National Gallery we were in, so we had a big name, but then they were out. Then they were back in, maybe, then they were out again, far too risky. And that was the story of those weeks in the run-up. I had to play sort of different organizations off one another, constantly juggling, reassuring, and saying, don't worry, these guys are doing it, so perhaps you should do it. Lots of legwork and a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Suddenly Derby were back in again, and we had a few organic inquiries, and this was the wind we needed in our sails. So it took that first person to stick their neck out, if you like, the first organization to stick their neck out. And actually it's the power, in my opinion, of the first follower, the next person that joins, that really gives a movement momentum. And the first follower video on YouTube is fantastic. It's this idea of the first follower. So do Google the first follower, it's fantastic. I took a 3-day holiday just at the most awkward time of the project. But when I came back, an entire gallery had gone on strike, which is just stunning. Things really were picking up, and this is when it got really excited that it was sort of out of our hands by this point. It did help that the People's Museum were putting on an exhibition about protests, so that was a perfect alignment. But nonetheless, it was incredibly brave to put an entire gallery on strike, and this all happened organically. We weren't ever pestering these people directly, they just heard about it through the networks. And that takes me to lesson number 7. Open for all. This is about empowering people, let them run with it. And that was the objective from the beginning, really, with Art Strike, to create something that people could run with. So in the spirit of a mass protest, we wanted to see as many art strikes as possible, but we really agonized over how prescriptive to be with the visuals. Should an organization have to use our branding and imagery to be involved, or was that putting a barrier to entry? Well, we figured that an action like this would be about safety in numbers, about feeling part of a community and sharing an identity. If the actions look the same and happen at the same time, the impact will be magnified. So we made a kit, and this is a grab from that sort of discussion around what might the poster look like, and a brief to the designer. And we really sweated over the detail, which in hindsight might have been slightly misplaced effort. In fact, it was the communication, the network building that really needed all of the effort, and the production of the poster and the graphics, I think, was probably slightly less important. Nonetheless, arriving at the point that we did with a kit that people could use certainly made it much easier for the idea to spread. The Lightbox Gallery made a brilliant video of us striking Sean Henry in Woking. This was another organic strike that we didn't push. And the crowning glory, though I don't want to have favorites, but I do, was of course Stan the T-Rex at Manchester Museum. The video has 80,000 views, 3,000 likes on the tweet, and 1,000 retweets. It's an incredibly bold and brave decision by the museum to put their star attraction on strike. And this was all, as you can see in the photo on the right, because of the energy and the belief from the staff on the ground who just said, we're going to do this. But then the backlash began. And this is when I started to panic, when people started getting not just snarky on Twitter, but quite angry. These are the snarky ones. I saved the angry ones. There were naysayers missing the point, really, and angry parents. Perhaps our message of you don't know what you've got till it's gone was a little esoteric for the dinosaur audience, but you can see here that people are saying, well, it was a bloody meteorite that killed the dinosaurs, not climate change. So yes, perhaps the campaign had a slightly esoteric point, but the really exciting thing here is Manchester Museum held their nerve, and then the community started to chip in and respond to the objections. This friction, which actually causes discussion, and it's this, the friction, people misunderstanding, the disappointed children, the parents having to have those difficult conversations with their kids, I think is what makes actions like this very powerful. And I guess I strongly believe that in the end, this friction was a good problem to have. And we need to be prepared to have those, to move through those difficult moments. While I'm on the topic of problems, I think the biggest thing for us was about having too many hands on the wheel. And of course, there is the adage that many hands make light work, and they do sort of sit in contrast. They're two sides of a sharp sword, if you like. So too many hands on the wheel. We were coordinating a distributed network of volunteers, and that is very messy and very difficult. And a vast amount of energy went in behind the scenes, not only making sure people felt involved, but also bringing other people up to speed and ensuring tasks were available for certain people to do. Just that coordination is very tricky, and I think quite hard to avoid. I don't have a solution other than to say that you have to learn to be comfortable with that discomfort, so long as we are aware that this was a sort of an open source project with distributed, non-hierarchical teams. So long as we're aware of that from the outset, and we take the time to work through the discomfort, we can make progress. Sometimes I think these projects need a benevolent dictator, someone to sort of grab the beast by the horns and just push it through. I know I ruffled some feathers and trod on toes at times, but I think without a bit of brute force, ArtStrike wouldn't have happened. So it is about many hands making light work, but on occasion, I think you do need people to just grab it and run with it. And each of those strikes that occurred only occurred because brave people in those organizations just said, we're going to do this. And they committed to it and just pushed it through. They kept bashing on the director's door. They kept sending emails. They kept building interest amongst their peers. It's the determination of those individuals that brought this movement throughout Europe. As I said, it's not an original idea, but I think the hook and the toolkit that we produced and the networks that we built helped it move throughout. It was designed to be open source from the start. And I do love occasionally hearing about new strikes that occur. And I'm trying to keep my eyes on it and update this map. So if any of you watching fancy producing more in the Southwest, that would be fantastic. The Holborn Museum in Bath put on an art strike as well, which was fantastic to see. So Museums for Future was a movement that sprang up earlier this year, and it's a far more organized affair than ArtStrike. Indeed, they have a Slack channel, they have a website, and they have 10 simple actions that museums can take to tackle the climate crisis. And you can repurpose that badge and attach it to your own website to show that you're supporting the cause. So please do consider joining Museums for Future, which is a more broader series of sort of actions and ideas for tackling the climate. And I think as movements like this coalesce into websites and brands, on the one hand, I sort of, in a way, I resent that it needs to be branded, but on the other hand, I think that's such an important lightning rod. As I said with ArtStrike, producing that kit and the visuals made it more concrete and more clear. And Museums for Future are trying to do that, to pull people together, have the discussion, provide resources. So do go and have a look. Join the movement. So one last lesson is to start small, but do start, because your movement will grow. Be that lightning rod, however small it is. The very fact that you're starting something is key. It's tempting to think that COVID has gone and buggered everything up. And it won't be the last pandemic, that's for sure. The knee-jerk reaction, I think, is to go digital. Take everything online, toe the line, don't take risks, don't rock the boat. Personally, I feel that digital isn't the answer, though it certainly has a role to play. I think we need to see each other face to face, to feel the energy building. And as I pointed out, one of the key lessons for me was to follow the energy. And digital has a role. There are tools that we can draw on, but I think our protests, our movements still need to happen in the physical world. They need to happen on the streets, in the galleries. Art has always been a powerful medium for protest, and I think the whole world watched the events unfold around Black Lives Matter. And this is the Colston statue in Bristol, my hometown, that was torn down, and then Mark Quinn very cleverly replaced it with a sculpture of one of the protesters. And Banksy also made some suggestions of what we could do to better memorialize these stories. So art has always been a great medium for progress. And I think the point I want to make is there is a huge reservoir of energy out there, creative energy, enthusiasm, and stories that need to be told. As long as the oil barons and bankers behave like bastards, I think we have license to ruffle a few feathers. It's scary and it's dangerous, but so is extinction. The upside of taking a risk, louder voices, broader awareness, more action, I think far outweighs the downside. We ask ourselves as individuals, as organizations, what more can we do for the climate? And the absolute minimum is to put up your hand, join the conversation, say something, start something. It doesn't matter how hard you push, as long as you're pushing in the right direction. It doesn't matter how big or how small. But let's go. Thank you very much. I will make these slides available. And I'm now ready for questions, Claire. I shall leave this slide up while we do questions, if that's okay.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, I was sort of really inspired by your call to bravery. And I suppose I just wondered what you perceive as maybe the main barrier to that for museums. And I suppose to ask an awful question, if you had a silver bullet, how would you use it?
Okay, well, in terms of the bravery piece, I think the discussion with National Gallery was a good case in point, in that I had excellent conversations with some quite senior people in the team who were all very much on board with the idea. And as the discussions went up to the very highest level, there was nervousness around making a political statement. The National Gallery is for everybody, and they didn't want to feel like they were making a political statement by sort of putting an artwork on strike in support of what is potentially construed as a sort of a left-wing or a liberal movement, which I think is obviously a real shame, because the climate crisis is not a political issue. So I can understand that these organizations have policies and reputations to protect, and I'm not advocating that we go and rip all that down, but I do think the world is changing and the audiences for these organizations is changing, and I therefore think their policies need to change. The silver bullet would be firstly to enable the people at the very bottom of the, on the front line of gallery work, can have a conversation with the director and and without having to go through these god-awful bureaucratic channels. So I think that the first step would be to have that conversation within each organization, where the people that want to do an action can really have the ear of the person at the top to make that call. And I think it would be fantastic to change all the directors in every museum for people that genuinely want to do these actions. But of course, there's a risk that we alienate people that don't agree that direct action is the way to address this. So there will always be feathers ruffled, but personally, I think let's just have those conversations within our organizations, but not just in silos, not just the people that are up for doing something, but across the hierarchy. I think the hierarchy needs to be leveled on issues such as this.
Thank you. That relationship between the different hierarchies is a thread that's come through the last 2 days. So I think that's an interesting one for us to take away. And there was a question, Ben, you mentioned the pack that people can access in terms of Art Strike, but there was just a question about whether there is a way to access more support in terms of how to approach that kind of action, things to think about, whether there's access to advice. I don't know if you sort of can help with that one. You're on mute.
I wish there was more we could do in terms of coordination for the wider community, for people interested in doing strikes. I think the Art Strike is more effective when it's coordinated, where there are more than one person doing a strike, but we don't have any formal way of helping coordinate that, I'm sad to say. So there is no team behind Art Strike as such. It is me at the moment. There are people that I'm sure are keen to help, but it's coordinating that help which is the challenge. So the thing I would say is that there are many people that are sort of interested in this, and I talked about Museums for Future as a good port of call to to start the discussion about maybe organising something that coordinated. At the very least, I'm happy to talk with anyone over the phone should they wish to get in touch, and you can track me down on Twitter or email. Thought Ben or Ben Templeton, you'll be able to find me if you want to have a discussion. So very happy to do that. And I'm sad to say we don't have a formal way of supporting distributed actions, but I would encourage you please to download the pack. I shall pop the link to that in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we haven't had any other questions pop up, so I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for taking the time to join us today. Really great talks and just a great diversity of different things that are going on, different ways that we can engage with the theme, so it's much appreciated.